My name is Rebecca Collins, and what I'm about to share happened to me on March 17th, 2022. I was on a personal pilgrimage through Italy, something I had dreamed of for years. I had just left Florence a few days before and found myself standing in St. Peter's Square, right as the sky began to dim with the weight of something eternal. The air was thick with expectation, and the soft echo of the Vatican bells carried a weight I can't quite describe. There was a silence in that square that didn't feel empty. It felt holy, as if the ground itself was breathing in anticipation. I didn't fully understand what I had walked into at first. People around me were murmuring prayers in different languages, clutching rosaries and lighting candles like they were waiting for a sign. I learned quickly that the conclave had just begun, that the cardinals were sealed inside the Sistine Chapel, praying, voting, listening for God's will. It wasn't a ceremony for cameras or tourists. It felt like heaven and earth were leaning into the same moment. I had grown up Catholic, but had never felt so close to the heartbeat of the church as I did right then. There were no announcements, no speeches, no distractions, just the knowledge that 120 men were inside that chapel with the weight of 2,000 years of faith on their shoulders. The thought of that shook me. I pictured them sitting beneath Michelangelo's Last Judgment, under that terrifying image of Christ, casting their votes in silence. I couldn't stop thinking how fragile and powerful that must be, how every breath in that room must feel like it's brushing eternity. I didn't know it yet, but something inside me had already started to change. I stood next to an older woman named Lucia, who had come all the way from Peru just to witness the moment. She held my hand and whispered, "We're not just waiting for a pope, we're waiting for a shepherd." That sentence stayed with me. And as names were whispered in the crowd, one kept coming up with a kind of softness I didn't expect: Luis Antonio Tagle. A cardinal from the Philippines, someone I had only heard of vaguely before, but now his name felt like it carried a kind of quiet weight. Lucia told me that Cardinal Tagle was known for his tears, that he wept when he preached the gospel, not for show, but because he genuinely felt the weight of Christ's love and mercy. That stunned me. In a world where leaders puff their chests and hide their emotions, here was a man who didn't just speak about compassion, he lived it. She said he had walked through refugee camps and stood in slums, not with pity, but with presence. That night, I looked up his name on my phone, and what I read began to stir something deep in me. His story wasn't flashy. He didn't come from power or privilege. He was born in a small town outside Manila, in a family that lived faith as a way of life, not performance, but practice. As I read more, I realized he didn't rise through the ranks of the church because of politics or ambition. He simply served. He served so quietly and sincerely that even the people who didn't know his name felt drawn to him the moment they heard it. I watched an old video of him speaking at a youth conference. He wasn't trying to entertain. He was talking softly, with this mixture of joy and sorrow that broke something open in me. And then he paused and started to cry. Not sobbing, not dramatic, just tears, silent and real, like the message he was sharing was too much for words alone. I remember thinking, this is what the church needs. Not another figure in a robe, but a heart that bleeds with Christ. Back in the square, the smoke was still black. No pope had been chosen yet, but something was happening in me. I felt like I was being pulled back to a part of my faith I had forgotten. The part that wasn't about rules or fear or tradition for tradition's sake, but about love. Deep, sacrificial, aching love. And the more I heard people talk about Tagle, the more I realized they weren't rooting for a man. They were hoping for healing. I didn't sleep that night. My hotel window overlooked a quiet alley in Vatican City, but my heart was louder than the silence outside. I kept thinking about the way people around the square had spoken about Cardinal Tagle, not like a politician or a frontrunner, but like a shepherd. It wasn't just his theology or experience, it was the way he made people feel seen. I realized that so many in the church, people like me, who had drifted or doubted, were starving for someone who reminded them why they believed in the first place. The next morning, I walked back to the square just after sunrise. The crowd had grown. Pilgrims were singing, praying, holding their breath again. I remember standing beside a group of young adults from Ghana who were talking about what it would mean for someone like Tagle from the global south to be elected pope. One of them said, "He wouldn't just represent us. He would understand us." That line hit me hard. I suddenly felt like this wasn't just a church event. It was something global, something human, something holy. That afternoon, a priest passed through the crowd and quietly asked if anyone wanted to go to confession. I hadn't been in years. I don't even remember saying yes, but the next thing I knew, I was kneeling under the shadow of a statue, pouring out everything I had been carrying. Doubt, anger, a loss of trust in the church. And the priest didn't lecture me. He just listened. When he gave me absolution, I started to cry, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like shame. It felt like coming home. Afterward, I found myself lighting a candle beneath a stone carving of the Good Shepherd. And I remember praying, "God, whoever you choose, please let him lead us with your heart. Let him carry your mercy. Let him not forget those on the margins." I don't know why I prayed that, but it felt urgent. And all I could see in my mind was that man with tears in his eyes, preaching the gospel like it was the first time it had ever been spoken. Later that evening, the square felt different, quieter, but heavier somehow. People weren't just standing around waiting for smoke anymore. They were kneeling. They were holding hands. They were worshiping in languages I couldn't understand, but somehow I felt every word. It was like we were all waiting for something deeper than a name. And I began to think, maybe the church isn't just choosing a pope. Maybe we're being asked to choose a kind of church, one that performs or one that feels, one that hides behind tradition or one that walks beside the broken. I overheard someone say the conclave might last days longer. That uncertainty didn't bother me, because in that moment, I realized that what I had come to Rome searching for wasn't a spiritual experience. I was searching for hope. And through Cardinal Tagle's story, I had found it not in dogma, not in pageantry, but in his witness. In the idea that holiness could look like a man who weeps during Massachusetts. That leadership didn't have to roar. It could whisper. It could kneel. It could suffer with us. I stayed for 3 more days. The smoke stayed black. And Cardinal Tagle was never officially declared pope, not yet at least. But it didn't matter, because what happened in that square changed me. I returned home with a heart softened by mercy and a faith that had been rewoven thread by thread. I saw the church not as a perfect institution, but as a suffering body desperately needing someone to love it back to life. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I don't know what the future holds for the church or who will wear the white robes next. But I know this: God is still speaking through tears, through silence, through the quiet faith of a man like Luis Antonio Tagle. If you felt something in this story, I invite you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that God still raises up shepherds, even in the quiet, even in Rome, even in you.